The sky was orange with smog. A teenager skated barefoot down Venice Beach. In South Central, helicopters hovered over burning streets. Same city, same day, completely different worlds. Los Angeles in the 1970s was a beautiful mess. Disco and riots, punk rock and protests, movie stars and blackout nights. One week in 1978, cops shut down a punk show in Hollywood. That same week, a 3-story mural rose in East LA, honoring migrant workers. Both were acts of rebellion. You clicked for 70s nostalgia, but this isn't just bell-bottoms and beach vibes. This is the decade LA got loud, angry, and unforgettable. Los Angeles in the 1970s was a city split in two, by freeways, by race, by money, by memory. One half chased Hollywood dreams. The other marched through the streets, demanding to be seen. In 1970, over 20,000 people gathered in East Los Angeles for the Chicano moratorium, a protest against the Vietnam War and the disproportionate number of Latino deaths overseas. It was meant to be peaceful. But by sundown, police had opened fire. 3 people were dead, including journalist Ruben Salazar, struck by a tear gas canister while sitting in a bar. The message was clear. Silence wouldn't be tolerated, but neither would resistance. That moment split the illusion of Los Angeles down the middle. On the surface, the city sold sun, stars, and storylines. But just beneath, entire communities were fighting for survival. In South Central, crime rates rose as jobs disappeared. In East LA, schools were overcrowded and underfunded. The city kept expanding, but not everyone was invited to grow with it. Still, something extraordinary was happening. Neighborhoods that were ignored by the system began building their own power. Groups like the Brown Berets organized health clinics, food drives, and school walkouts. Churches became hubs for activism. Living rooms turned into organizing spaces. Where institutions failed, people filled the gap. Walls became more than concrete. They became voices. Murals sprang up across Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, and Pacoima, bright, unapologetic, and political. They told stories the textbooks didn't, of farm workers, resistance, culture, and memory. They said, "We are still here." Even the city's most segregated corners began to pulse with unity. Black, Latino, Asian, and immigrant communities, often divided by geography and language, found common ground in struggle. What outsiders saw as chaos, locals knew as transformation. By the mid-70s, Los Angeles didn't sound like any other city in America. It screamed, danced, clashed, and chanted. And each sound came from a place of defiance. In 1977, a band called X played a set so loud, it blew out the power at a tiny Hollywood club. Outside, sirens howled. Inside, kids in torn shirts and safety pins punched the air. This wasn't just music, it was revolt. Punk had arrived in LA and it didn't care who was watching. Bands like The Germs, Black Flag, and Fear turned garages and dive bars into arenas of rage. These weren't polished acts. They were raw, messy, and alive. Their lyrics tore into the American dream, calling out suburban decay, political corruption, and cultural numbness. For thousands of disaffected youth, punk was the first language that made sense. But while punk screamed, disco danced, with purpose. In 1973, a woman named Jewel Thais Williams opened Catch One on Pico Boulevard. It quickly became one of the first Black-owned discos in the country, and more than that, a sanctuary. Gay, lesbian, trans, and queer people, especially people of color, came there to be free, safe, and seen. While the outside world legislated who they could be, Catch One gave them a dance floor where they already were enough. Elsewhere in the city, another sound rose. At the Troubadour, a small West Hollywood club, artists like Elton John, Linda Ronstadt, and Tom Waits debuted to small crowds. Folk, rock, and country blended into something new, something unfiltered. This was LA's other rebellion. soft on the surface, sharp underneath. And in the barrios of East LA, Chicano soul was born. Funky bass lines met sweet harmonies and Spanglish poetry. Backyard parties became stages. Lowrider radios blasted songs that no major label wanted, but no local could forget. The rhythm of 70s Los Angeles wasn't uniform. It was layered, colliding, alive. Every beat was a protest. Every lyric was a survival strategy. But let me ask you this, when the music stops and the silence kicks in, can you hear what the walls were trying to say? When the noise faded, Los Angeles found another way to speak, through color, symbols, and paint on concrete. The 70s sparked a cultural uprising on the walls of the city. In neighborhoods long ignored by galleries and museums, art became public, political, and impossible to ignore. Streets that once felt forgotten transformed into open-air canvases. Murals stretched across buildings, bridges, and underpasses, telling stories of migration, identity, struggle, and pride. In 1973, a collective called Los Four, Carlos Almaraz, Frank Romero, Gilbert Lujan, and Roberto de la Rocha, took Chicano art into the heart of the mainstream. When they exhibited at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, it was the first time a major institution opened its doors to voices from East LA. But their real gallery had always been the city itself. Their work wasn't decorative, it was declarative. It said, "We exist, we remember, we create." On the other side of the freeway, a different form of protest took shape. A performance art group known as ASCO, meaning nausea in Spanish, staged silent marches, spontaneous no-movies, and subversive photo shoots across the urban sprawl. They spray-painted their names on the steps of El ACMA in 1972, a response to being excluded from its exhibitions. It wasn't vandalism, it was a signature, a demand to be recognized. Art in 70s LA was not safe. It was not subtle. And it was never asking for permission. From Watts to Highland Park, Black, Asian, and immigrant artists joined the wave, blending heritage with protest. A new visual language emerged, one that made space for pain, memory, and hope. This wasn't about art world fame. It was about survival. In the Golden Hills of Los Angeles, another revolution was happening. Quietly, behind the camera. By the early 70s, the Hollywood system was collapsing. The old studio rules no longer applied. Censorship had loosened, box office numbers were falling, and a new generation of directors saw an opening. They didn't want to entertain America. They wanted to confront it. This was the birth of New Hollywood. Young, unproven filmmakers were given the reins to major projects. In 1974, Roman Polanski released Chinatown, a haunting portrait of power and corruption that painted Los Angeles as a city built on lies and stolen water. That same year, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre showed that horror could be both terrifying and political. These weren't just movies, they were social autopsies. Directors like Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and Hal Ashby pushed boundaries with every frame. And Los Angeles, with its contradictions and shadows, became the perfect backdrop. But while the big screen went dark and cerebral, independent cinema exploded just beneath it. The rise of underground film collectives and DIY screenings gave voice to artists outside the mainstream. Filmmakers from marginalized communities told stories that had never reached theaters. Stories about immigration, poverty, race, queerness, and survival. In Watts, experimental filmmakers like Charles Burnett captured everyday black life with poetic realism. His film, Killer of Sheep, shot on weekends and with non-professional actors, became one of the most important American films ever made, and it never played in a multiplex. This wasn't Hollywood's Los Angeles. It was the real one. Even the format changed. Super 8, handheld cameras, found footage, aesthetics shifted from polished to personal. The screen stopped being a stage and became a mirror. Not every story from 70s Los Angeles made headlines. Some were quieter, but just as defining. While politics shook the streets and cameras captured revolution, everyday life moved on in the shadows of all that noise. And in those details, the clothes, the food, the sidewalks, the true identity of the city was taking shape. Fashion was more than style. It was a statement. On one end of the city, punks tore sleeves off leather jackets and drew anarchy signs on their jeans. In East LA, Chicanas perfected the sharp elegance of the chola look: creased dickies, winged eyeliner, and unflinching eyes. The streets became runways of rebellion, where identity was stitched into every thread. Food was protest too. Boyle Heights taquerias served more than tacos. They served community. Korean BBQ joints in mid-Wilshire became gathering places for immigrant families navigating a new culture. Soul food kitchens in South Central fed not just stomachs, but spirits. And the birth of LA's food truck culture, long before Instagram, turned parking lots into pop-up celebrations of heritage. The neighborhoods pulsed with identity. Limert Park, Highland Park, Monterey Park, all with their own rhythms, dialects, and rituals. You could cross 3 blocks and hear 3 languages. One corner had a jazz band practicing in a garage. The next had kids breakdancing on cardboard. The city didn't just host culture, it was culture. And even the mundane held meaning. The graffiti on the bus bench. The sound of the paletero bell. The hum of a lowrider cruising down Whittier Boulevard on a Sunday afternoon. These weren't random moments. They were how a fragmented city kept telling itself it was alive. The revolution wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered. So here's the truth. If you want to understand Los Angeles in the 70s, don't just follow the headlines. Follow the ordinary. Because that's where the soul of the city lives. Los Angeles in the 70s wasn't just a city frozen in time. It was a feeling, a contradiction, a heartbeat caught between smoke and sunlight. A place where murals rose from broken sidewalks, where teenagers turned distortion into an anthem, where protest lived not only in the streets, but in the clothes people wore, the food they cooked, the songs they blasted from lowriders on Sunday afternoons. Maybe you lived through it. Maybe you're just discovering it now. Either way, here's the truth. Los Angeles didn't survive the 70s by staying the same. It survived by refusing to. And now, we want to hear from you. What stayed with you? What part of this story felt closest or farthest from the LA you know or imagine today? Tell us in the comments. We'll be reading them, because these stories don't end when the video does. If this journey moved you, if it made you feel, remember, or see things differently, consider giving it a like and leaving a comment. It helps more people find this story, because when the algorithm sees that you stayed, it listens. In the end, history isn't just what gets written down. It's what we remember, what we share, and what we carry forward together. Thanks for being part of it.